Good morning.
Good morning.
Good evening.
Oh my God, there's two of you. Good evening, good morning. Let me just embarrassingly show you what I'm doing. Just don't tell Mark Anderson. I'm coding. Can anyone tell what I'm doing?
Something to do with Hamilton?
Of course. This is my survey. So I have to code the answers.
Right.
We can start doing analysis. I had a fantastic session today with Dave Millard, who teaches me like I'm a child, and that's a good thing, because this is not my world. So the reason I'm showing you is not just because it's boring and I want you to share my boredom. It's also a little interesting. Not the results, that's something we can talk about later, but the way we do it. I'm just going to stop now. So I have a huge master plan sheet. Let me just open that. So here's one called raw data. So this is from that survey that you know about. Many of the questions were on the Likert scale of strongly disagree, all of that stuff, right? For quite a few of them, I asked questions, what tools do you use Reference Manager? And I didn't have checkboxes for that. I just let them write it out. So now I have to code them like this. So I take, this is from A and this is B, different columns. So if they mention Microsoft Word, I put a 1 here, Mendeley, and also no reference at all here. And then I get what's called numbers at the end. I'm not sure what to do with them, but that's what they want for this PhD stuff. It could be fun to have amazing visualizations for this. That's kind of my point.
Empirical data. Who needs that? Actually, I actually sent a link to Adam, and I probably ought to send it out. I just by the miracle of Twitter, I saw this thing of some guy saying, basically he posted on, I don't know how you pronounce it, RXiv or whatever, and his things. My paper is still being moderated, mainly because it's a bit sweary, but it's a guy who works for Tableau Research, sort of saying that that as visualization practitioners, we are not entirely innocent of some of the stuff that's going on.
All right, I'm going to turn off now. I think I've done them all for this. Ta-da! Congratulate me.
I know I'm not supposed to share it, so but I've been really enjoying reading this apropos visualizations and stuff, for the wonderful fact that it's a series of case studies, but they all start most unusually with the data. And about this, actually the data was a real pain in the ass to get, and I had to do all these things to get to the point where I can even do something. I then realized that the thing I wanted to do was not doable with the data I had, and that interplay, and that bit's normally elided from anything you read.
Sorry, Mark, is this the story of your life?
No, not entirely. Other parts of my life are available. Ooh, somebody just, what's this?
I think it's worth showing two things, some competitors in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So Raphael sent all of us, I think, an email lately about an interesting other software. This is Exaptive. It's by Dave King. He will do a demo for us at some point. But what's interesting is it does all kinds of graphing. They do all kinds of analysis and things as well. But a nice little detail is if you add a tag in their system, it's actually got a description. So that means we can treat it as a concept.
Ooh.
So that's why I sent out the email to all of you yesterday saying, would you like to add some concepts to your articles? Or even if you haven't written an article, add some concepts, we'll put it in the book, because that can go into a system like that. And hopefully a system like what we're working on natively. Isn't that kind of cool?
Yeah.
Very.
And also, it's like all this exciting stuff. Here's Phil from Scholarcy. He's going to be doing a demo for what they do soon. They allow you to extract cards from all kinds of data cards from PDFs. So now it's doing this is just a JSON. giving back all kinds of stuff. Hang on. See if there's a demo.
Out of interest, does Scholarly basically use publicly accessible data as its input, or does it have relationships with publishers to get at information that it uses as input?
They do all kinds of clever AI-based. They don't have, as far as I know, they don't have a lot of relationship with publishers necessarily.
Yeah.
So now I took a PDF that's on my desktop. I have horrible internet connection. So this is, as you can hear, I just come home. So what this does, it extracts all these things, and this email shows us what we can get from them. I may use this for author or reader to extract not only DOI giving me back, like we used with Crossref, citation information, but also headings and so on. So that means that if we collaborate with Phil is this founder of Scholarly, we can generate a lot of visual meta without having to do it from scratch. So for instance, key concepts in Dave Millard's document here, it looks quite good. And there's all kinds of highlights based on different things. They do different things. They do, they find all that, if there are any tables. And they also try to find the conclusion, not just the conclusion section, but a little bit of linguistic analysis, etc., and so on. Isn't that pretty cool?
Yeah, no, it is. The reason for my question was, second aspect will be recorded, but as it happened at the dinner I was at last night, I happened to find myself sitting next to an old term mate who it transpires is now head of a large publishing company. So yeah, who's not being a sort of this area. He, so the point is, the perspective from the business thing is, all these bastards are out to steal our stuff, and I sort of asked him, "Well, you've heard of things like Scholarly and things?" So clearly not, because in a sense they're operating from the outside. But I still cleave to the notion that I think way back to the first conversation that with Freud and Chris and Paul Smart, at which this idea of, trying to pump prime better citational data sort of emerged. And I shall go back and have another go. I mean, although this person is not technical, the thing is, clearly he's dragging this venerable publishing outfit in, kicking and screaming into the 21st century, which is an interesting tale to hear. Sorry?
Please do introduce if you feel like it at some point.
Yeah, no, I mean, he rather got lost when I mentioned software, which is interesting for a publishing company. But no, well, actually, it's not true. A lot, it was really interesting. So a lot of it was solved by, well, what we've done is we got rid of this useless stuff. We've outsourced it to people who do things. And I think, yes, but
that sounds like something we know about.
Yeah, no, but it's that sort of thing. And so, but yes, but do you actually understand what you're sitting on top of? It's not as subtle as just protecting IP. Anyhow, it's rather aside from what we do.
By the way, the recording on Monday was lost. I think it is because I was using my what's it called, Dropbox as a scratch disk, so to speak. So I'm very sorry about that. I changed that, and I had a meeting this morning with Dave Millard that I recorded just to test that everything's fine, and it was over an hour and it was fine. Also had a meeting with the former president of Mauritius, which was interesting. I'll be interviewing her for the book on Monday. The next two interviews lined up along the political lines is former president of Romania and Croatia. They are all academics, so they're not just a politician doing politician stuff. They are crossover, which makes it quite interesting for us, even though at some point we want politicians. But having shown you Exaptive and Scholarly, I think we can go back into implementation-ish mode. Mm-hmm. Adam, I feel you've been kind of trampled over for a while along the lines of lots of discussions, but what are we going to build? But I also see Peter has his hand up, so I guess, Peter, please go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to note that IMBA has been doing a lot of major work on the visualization side. They just added support for putting CSS inside of conditionals, and they're working on allowing you to transition to variable height elements and all. Unfortunately, their documentation is lagging farther and farther behind the software. So it's slowing me down a bit as I'm trying to find little fragments of example code in their GitHub repo to try to figure out how to use all these great new tools that they're putting in. Hopefully they'll eventually get caught up on the documentation side. But for one simple little demo, if you remember how I had that little logo last time with the Latin motto on it, I now have it so that if you mouse over the Latin motto, the text will morph from Latin to its English translation. So there are lots of great hooks in there. I think it's the right tool to be using for building demos. But again, what's really killing them now is their lack of adequate documentation. On the political front, I stumbled onto a crazy reference. I was reading a book on the 1964-65 World's Fair, and it mentioned that Robert Moses, the master builder who created the New York City park system, had written a master's dissertation at Wadham College, Oxford, that was an operating system for a non-corrupt model government. So that was really intriguing. So I have an email out to the Wadham College librarian trying to find out if there's any chance they might be able to dig up that master's thesis and digitize it because of its tremendous historical value. But otherwise, it was so frustrating. The book talked about it. Then I go to the notes for that page of the book, and all it did was cite 4 biographies of Robert Moses and a couple tangential articles. No mention anywhere where they got that nugget about the master's thesis. No name for the master's thesis. No year that the master's thesis was issued. It's like, could you be any more tantalizing and useless in your citation work?
Good conspiracy theory stuff. I'm sure it was taken out in the backlot and burnt in case anyone got to it.
Wadham College is quite the place. Know it well through friends. I have no real connection. Did I show this book, by the way, last time?
Yeah.
It's absolutely delicious. It's like a piece of cake. It takes all the history books that I've read, and just, even having just a tiny bit of time, I've gotten this far into it. I'm sorry, Peter, you bring up such interesting points. It brings up points of an issue, just as a brief tangential, the Roman Empire, right? There were 2 sets of people there who were good at reading and writing. The legions, so the military ended up running the country, and the slaves, because they were basically invading the Greeks and taking the Greek writers and using them as their slaves. Most Romans, high-born Romans, so to speak, didn't know how to read and write. That's a nice little thing, but the way it goes into the details of how that sows the seeds of their destruction, because who has the power? This, when it's called Masters of the Word, they really talk about who controls media, when, and what that means for democracy. It's an absolutely incredible read.
Glad you're liking it.
What's that?
I'm glad you're liking it.
Oh, are you reading it?
Yeah, I suggested it last week. I got up to radio, and now it feels like more common modern history, but
it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, who taught Moses how to read and write? Just that bit. It's like, hang on, these are questions that can be asked.
Yeah.
Oh, it's ridiculous. So thank you. I completely forgot where I got it from. So
you hold that cover up again. Every time I'm ready to take the screenshot, you put it down before I can click.
Well, my copy is en route, so I'm no stoked.
I've got a good name.
Oh, okay,
William
got it.
J.
Thank you.
Bernstein.
Right. So, Alan, you missed 2 quick technical things. I'll show you briefly just to go back.
Give the review.
One is not that. Hang on. There's all kinds of overlays. One was Exaptive. This is Dave King. He's going to do a bit of a demo for us soon. He does all kinds of amazing visualizations, relationships, visual graphs, and things. Why did it jump back? Something weird with this machine. Anyway, one of the interesting things I discovered while working with him is that their tags kind of things have descriptions, which means we can use them as our concepts or glossaries. It's exactly the same thing. There's a term and a description. So that was really cool. The other thing with someone else we're working on along these
Convergent evolution.
Yeah, was the Scholar. Gosh, the tab system in the new Mac OS is just absolutely quite horrific. was Scholarly. They do flashcards, so they do analysis of documents to find the concepts, headings, all kinds of stuff. And Phil of Scholarly, the founder, he's a friend and he's very excited in the work we're doing. He will also be doing some kind of a demonstration. But the point of showing it to you guys is we can integrate with these things. So if we need analysis there, he's very happy to rent us that at a very decent cost. It doesn't take so much server processing. It's all done on the web, or rather on the cloud. But today we're hopefully going to talk a little bit more about what we want to build. And I think, Adam, we kind of agreed we wanted to build a library that is of external documents, personal documents, and notes. Is that right?
Yep. Yes.
These talkative Swedes, I can never get you to shut up.
I've been thinking about now when at least two people are reading the same book at the same time. I was thinking about how a digital book club would look like if we. I'm sure there are services for that. I'm sure I've seen some as well. But what would the digital book club, if we want to read the same book at the same time or close in time, or even after one, even at different times? But how would that book club look like? Which things would we share, and how would we share it, and and what do we want to see? Because I really would like to. I would love to see Alan and Frodo's annotations for that book. If I'm a month after you reading that book, I really want to see the trail you left when you read it, instead of the regular Kindle, the popular highlights. Sometimes they are good, but they are very hit and miss, and I really want to see what people I know or trust or find interesting things about the book. So this kind of book club thing, and even maybe with the audio comments as well. Tangential, of course, but it's interesting.
That goes a bit to hypothesis and stuff, right? Wouldn't you say? I mean, I do agree, but the thing is, I'm just trying to find like here's a page in this book. For those who do not deal with, book, anyway, here you go. Have a heart attack. Right, so it's really, really scribbled because I feel I want to get my soul into this thing. I don't want it to just be, a highlight in yellow, even though that's all I can do in Reader. So obviously it becomes more difficult, but Hypothesis, they do these annotations. Don't they allow you to somehow see a group of people's annotations?
I believe so. Because I think it's set up as essentially an open system. So you show them that. Sorry, Peter.
Yeah, I went through a book highlighting phase as an undergrad. I was doing like 2-color highlights, darker color for the most important topics, lighter color for the elaborations on them. And then I got done, and looking back, I realized that the book had become completely illegible from the highlights bleeding through from one side of the page to the other side of the page. Worst of all, what was significant that I highlighted on the first reading really wasn't that significant when I went back to it, and it actually seemed to get in the way of my finding things that I needed when I was looking at the book for a purpose other than memorizing key points of the book for the exam coming up.
So
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I have the opposite experience, but I hear your point. So just visually, so here's a normal document. I select text to H, and then I do H without selecting text. It only shows the highlighted stuff, right? What I wanted to do is have a line break in between each section. We haven't done that yet. That's why it's a bit messy. But the idea is that, if I want to, actually, let me just check how this looks. So I'm going to do one nicely. So despite this, and then I do this. Okay, there is a line break, but there isn't a space. Good.
Yeah.
This means that if it wasn't for showing you the yellow, this would actually be my trail through the book already.
It's an interesting thing in that I've been pondering on this with actually doing some stuff in author, and what it tracks back to is sort of part of it's muscle memory and style. Because if I put that in counterpoint to Peter's description of highlighting, it's not necessarily there's wrong or right way. What's interesting is as much whether you do or don't draw on something, it's how you sort of interact with the annotations. So in a sense, do you look at the book, see the annotations, or flick through them? So, you know, in my idealized world, I'd read paper books because I find them mentally easier to absorb like that. But I'd annotate a digital copy. Because I'm such a crap typist, I probably would actually need to speak the text and let it find the relevant match, which would get you to the highlight point. You know, if we're postulating a sort of a future world, I mean, a real sadness now is that, you know, you pay twice basically if you want to have the ebook and the paper book. And I'd always have, if I can only have one, I'd always have paper, because simply I find ebook, I just find it hard to do non sort of lying on the beach reading in any form but paper.
Wouldn't you say it very much depends on the kind of book? I mean, when you're doing research for your work, it's a lot easier to read digitally because you're doing a lot of looking up and.
No, actually, funnily not. I mean, yeah, and it's sort of counterintuitive, and some wise person's probably figured this out. But I just find that I lose focus far more easily. You know, reading something that's not immediately digestible. You know, if you're reading a story, the narrative's driving you along, and that's fine. And I can sit there and read that on a Kindle kind of thing. But you know, even if I've embiggened all the text on a nice big 4K screen and something, I still find it hard to properly consume. You know, so academic type texts, and I don't know. I mean, it's not that I like it that way. I mean, I prefer it wasn't that way, but I'm finding that, you know, nature has said if I try that, I go far slower. And in fact, if I mark, and the other thing about marking, and this is why I say I think it's a when a habit sounds pejorative, but it's a style or a method that's learned. I find if I see something marked, it creates a dissonance. It's a bit like using a spatial hypertext, or, you know, or your concept map. The moment you draw a line between two things, those two items are immediately more privileged in the space than the things that have no line between them. And that wasn't what you meant by drawing the line. You were simply just making a connection. But I find my sort of visual brain, you know, refuses to play that game. And it puts in a filter I never meant to apply. Oh, people have that. I see Peter's got his hand up.
My vision would be AR reading glasses, and I have a highlighter that doesn't actually have any ink on it, and I would trace the smooth, non-damaging tip of the highlighter over a line in the book that I'm looking at, and the software would automatically apply a virtual highlight on top of the book so that I could turn that highlight on or off and associate keywords and tags with the highlights so that I could have sets of highlights appear and disappear while having used the physical affordance of dragging the highlighter over the text when I was using it at the time, but actually have that motion be recorded digitally by the AR system. Heaven knows how long it'll take for us to get there, but at least intuitively, it seems like it should be doable with a lot of computing power and some clever programming.
Yeah, actually on that note, I only have 3 minutes, unfortunately, but I'll just throw in a different way to think about maybe the highlighting just off of my recent experience. So I read a lot on Kindle. I still prefer the print, but Kindle's just practical. So I was reading The Lathe of Heaven, and there are points that are quotes from, you know, famous thinkers, and then she, of course, Ursula Le Guin has an incredible vocabulary, so there are words in there that I've never seen before, right? And then there are beautiful points that are made. I would like to be able to highlight those 3 different classes in different things. I'd like to be able to highlight a passage and indicate via color or something, but not in a way that's as laborious as like adding a note that, hey, the thing in here is just a word that I haven't seen before. Send it over to my word bank so I can process later. You know, oh, this is a Confucius quote. I want that to pop over to the Confucius or to the quote section. So maybe the thing is not so much just highlighting and compressing, but being able to intercede a little bit in between, hey, I read something interesting and what do I want to do with it? And not like something as specific as go into this file and organize it, but just like what sandbox do I want to dump it in for now?
So it's a semantic, in a sense, it's a semantic label, isn't it? You know, so the
Yeah.
point, you know, that these highlights, quotes, whatever. So all these or all these inferred links are not for the same reason. I think
Right, and it could be very easily, like we could probably program it ourselves by just highlighting it a different color, and already that seems like too much of a step. But it does open the doors to some possibilities of collaboration outside of that, right? Rather than having two people who are reading the same book and they're highlighting different things, let us highlight things that are maybe interesting to talk about, right? Or, you know, you could refine it somewhat. All right, I gotta go. Apologies.
I think, Peter, your point earlier was very interesting about why we highlight. There is a highlight to help us read a section, and there is a highlight to categorize, like Alan talked about, you know, this is a Confucius, put it in a category so I can read it for that, and so on. Because I find this kind of interesting right now. I almost forgot, you know, if you do the highlighting H and then you press H now, it does actually show with headings, which I think is quite useful. So at a certain point, and I think maybe we should change the coloring so that we don't have the yellows. It's a bit hard to read, but just a slight indication that it is the highlighting. Now you're beginning to build a new document, right? And maybe in here, we can, even after the fact, do some kind of clicking to say what these highlights are. And of course, you should be easy. It should be easy. It isn't now, but it should be easy to read your document again without any highlights.
I was going to say, yeah, actually, the ability to just, because you're right, they're there for a purpose. And I suppose I mean, it's not a strongly held view. It's more a recommendation. It's more, sorry, a reflection of my physical mental limitation, whatever. Is that I sort of just find almost any markup distracting to my parsing of the data. So being able, but having that there and having the semantics of why you did it, I agree, which is why I liked Peter's idea that, you know, so in essence, it's like a sort of non-destructive marking. And that's partly what that boils down to is the progress of technology. But I think that's where I'd want to get to, because I'd almost like to be able to come to the thing pristine, which is why I'm prepared to pay a little more for a secondhand book that I know hasn't been drawn all over, because I'm not trying to reconstruct the reader's thoughts of it. I'm trying to look at, you know, have my own interaction.
How far are we going to go into the annotation discussion today rather than the library?
Well, I think we should talk about the library stuff.
But no, because it was Adam who kind of derailed us here. And because the thing is, the really cool timelines we have, I think, are very, very worthwhile. I think if we spend more time refining those interactions, we will get something really useful. And I think that, I really think we should just make an amazing timeline. That's the first thing. Because also with Visual Meta, we are now most likely going to do web science next year. And we're going to have meetings with them, I hope, soon, so that they will be able to put more data in the Visual Meta. Because it's really kind of lacking. You know, we have so many categories, obviously, that we discussed. So that could be more powerful. And of course, we hope to do hypertext next year as well. So if we apply ourselves to making it an incredible environment for really finding stuff, that's a great first step. And then we can do the notes and the personal stuff later, maybe. I don't know.
I thought Peter first.
Yeah, but hang on, Peter, before I throw it over to you, what I realize is, and this sounds very naive and stupid, but we're amongst friends, a citation is a highlight. It is a highlight of a previous book. It is as though someone in the timeline has highlighted a previous work by the act of citing it. If you write in a document, I think Doug's paper was interesting, and you cite that, then in this timeline, or any citation timeline, Doug has another score, so to speak. So we can obviously try to do some basic styles or analysis for why was it highlighted. I know we talked about link types before, but even if we're able to extract the sentence before the citation. So if, let's say, you click on a specific paper, and one of the things that comes up in, here are all the documents that cited this paper and the sentences where the citation appeared. It may provide a really quick way to find how that paper fits in this field. Peter?
Okay, I'd like to see quotations be raised to first-class entities in author and reader so that the system could automatically recognize a quotation. I think that should be a straightforward information extraction. The pattern should be easy enough with a few regular expressions to be able to pick out where quotations are. So then we'd be able to get a view of where all the quotes are in the document. So maybe like press a Q key and then suddenly just have the quotations of external sources appear as like an outline of quotes in the document. Then we could look for keywords within the quotes so that you could do a search for quotes about. So if one of our concepts appears inside the text within quotation marks, that quotation would then get bound to the context, bound to the concept. So you could do a quotes about concept request and then just get the quotes that had that concept invoked inside of them. One useful thing to bring over from Tinderbox might be part of its implicit tagging system now, so that in Tinderbox you can have a whole bunch of terms that are associated with the tag and then automatically apply the tag if any of the words associated with that appear. So we could do the same thing for the concept. So you'd have the concept, the definition, plus little quotable text fragments that would be the equivalent of the concept, so that any of them would be an implicit mention of the concept without having to manually go in and apply the concept to that expression.
It sounds interesting and quite advanced. I just wanted to show you guys on our Visual Meta website now at the bottom, we have where it's been implemented. I don't have a brand name for Adam and Mark's. If you want to do something, I will put a logo here. But this is where we link to everybody who's got something and why. So this links to the visualizations, explain, demo, and open the demo.
I hope you appreciate the Web 1.0 styling of the pages.
Yeah, I mean, just staying with these two, you know, this is really powerful stuff. I really think we can apply ourselves to get a lot more out of this rather than going in a completely new direction. I think it's quite impressive. There are many things we can change, and I think we should look at doing that rather than throwing things out.
So my hand up at this point was simply to sort of say, in terms of, for instance, that data set, well, is there anything else that needs putting into it? I mean, Adam and I had a bit of a sort of ran on after Monday's meeting, had a chat on this or that. And one of the things sort of that we were talking about was, well, perhaps for the timescale we have and what we're trying to prove, that we want to maybe effectively prefabricate some of the endpoints. So for instance, what we may want to do is to sort of seed in some more metadata that allows us to simulate what we would envisage being calculated in due course. But we haven't got to the point, that's sort of magic phase not yet built, but we can posit that this might be possible. So the question is, well, what would we want those to be? And if I know what they are, I can, for instance, build them into one of the joys of this. I mean, although I think this is using the full 2021 set, that I now have a DOI that points to last year's, and with a bit of kicking of the library, I can probably get the latest set put into it. And because one of the whole points of this, to me, part of the value, quite apart from anyone who just wants to look at the hypertext conference, is really, it was about just this very thing. Can I have something that's relatively complete, has as few errors as, that we can reasonably have them, so that we can start with a sort of solid substrate in which to do new stuff. In other words, so we're not constantly having to go back and fix the wretched data noise, stuff that shouldn't be causing us a problem. So we can concentrate on the things we are trying to visualize. But so what I sense is there's scope for adding more metadata, and I'm very happy to do that and sort of feed that back into the data set if people have an idea of what it is.
I'd like to have information on whether a source is merely cited or whether it's quoted.
That's 1,400 papers. Yes. I'm not sure. I may be overpromised there, but no, I take no. Your point is extremely valid, and I think this gets to the heart of where I think what we're trying to move towards, and this is where the sort of semantic capture is important. The interesting thing to me is how well how this gets done, because we seem to be, where the state of the art is at the moment is we're expecting, the computer to play catch up. So it's using its TDIF or whatever it is, to sort of try and work out what the process was before it. To me, part of the joy of visual meta, and although it's early stages yet, is that that's exactly the kind of thing that I would rather that the originating author was putting into their work, because they know why they did it, or the tool that they're using. Going back to what Freud was saying about being able to mark stuff up, would in a sense be capturing this, and then it's passed on for free. Free in terms of there's no extra work to be done. Because I think I still think we're some way off from something just going through and doing it, simply because I'm always conscious when people talk about keywords, and being someone who doesn't use particularly small vocabulary, that it works up to a point. If you've got a well-defined word with a narrow usage, it's very easy to find now.
Okay, I think we need to. Okay, Adam, what do you want to do? Because we can spend literally years on the surrounding issues, and that's worthwhile. But I think we're in a point now where we can actually do something, and I think we need to make some frames for this. I suggest one of the frames is we use the data we have. We can build for data we can generate with visual meta and so forth, but it has to be based on what we have.
Yep, but we also have some data in our heads that is not really put in. It's not data, knowledge in our head. There should be data, I think. And that is why I'm going back to the selections, both selections of documents, the curation part, and in documents a selection of quotes or a selection of passages or interesting things in the documents. I think these are the crucial things, because all the documents are there out in the world, and you can get most of the documents. It's just a matter of time and patience to get most of the documents. Of course, there are rare documents that Peter have to master theses that he have to but he will eventually find that one, and for most documents you can get them in some way. So, and that is not enough. It's actually the reading list. What should be read, and we have much more limited time than access to documents. I don't think access is a thing. So concentrating on fully on the selection part, curation of good documents, and that is subjective, of course. And also the selection of good things to read in documents. I want that documented in some way. So if we can take the future of the text, the book, volume 1, or the ACM data set, and find a way of showing both passages in those papers and actually showing which papers to read. I think that would be kind of the missing data for me, at least, because now I can see the 1,000 documents, and I find a few of them have interesting titles, but I don't know if they're worth reading, and I have very limited time. But I like to read good. But which of the 1,000 should I read?
Well, okay, this comes down a little bit to your efforts, Adam, because if we can have a basic use management system, even if it's cookie-based, then it would be very nice in this visualization or similar to go through and then hit a key like just I for interesting or H to hide. So you go through and you do your own basic, like that looks completely out, and it goes away. You don't have to worry about it again. And then, you build up something, and then you have a second layer of further notes. If that can then be shared, I agree with you. I would love to read Mark's, for instance, because he has high expertise in this document area, to go through his, first of all, just see what he has. And then he may say, this is a crucial document. Completely agree with you. That would be fantastic. And then if I can have somehow a mechanism to say, copy what Mark has said about this document into my library, as in, copy the metadata, that would be quite interesting. And if that furthermore can be used, if I can, in my thesis, cite saying that I've included this document because Mark Anderson in this library said it was worth reading.
Well, just threw in there, I did occur to me, now we have the data set, and I'd be very happy to send it to, is it Dave? Phil Gooch. But I just wonder if, because I don't know enough about, I haven't used Glossary enough to know, but I'm just, again, wondering if another sort of lens like that, looking at the data set, finds anything new or interesting in it.
Well, he looks at the full documents.
Sure. So I suppose what I'm getting at is, does that, arguably say, well, he looks at them all already. So it could just be, well, look, if you just bound your query to just these documents, what do you get? Because again, I suppose what I found really interesting coming out of this is it's helping surface the unknown unknowns. There are things we want to do that are not as simple to do as we thought they were. And as like Adam brings up, sometimes the most interesting things don't just manifest as something as nice as a keyword or a deliberate link. It's just that abstruse association, something rattling around at the back of the brain that's kind of hard to put down on paper, and if anywhere might go onto a kind of hypertext spatial map.
I am planning that for Phil to come and talk to us on Monday.
Good. Anyway, it's
so
just,
you can ask him.
Sure.
I find it interesting what they do, but it's a very different interface than what I do. So that's one of the things we talk about quite frequently. I mean, I'm trying to build a basic library just for author and reader, and it's very listy and very, very simple. I think this could be more interesting.
I wonder how we should collaborate on this, because now I program locally here, and and I will use web technology because it's the most accessible, I think. Both, most people can use it without installing anything. So the threshold is very low, and it's very quick to iterate as well. So even if this may not be the final product or thing, but but should it be, for simplicity's sake, because there are so many dimensions. We want to have something local first, private or personal at least, that you have control over. But should we skip that part and run it on a server for the moment being, just to speed it up, and then transfer it to a local copy? Do you get my point here? So we can, because actually transferring the annotations and so on, that is quite a big project in itself, if it should be local first, because then you
I think it depends on what people want this thing to do. To be obvious, one thing is to make a static library interactive, as we have now. And the second one is our own curation of that library. So if you do our own curation, I don't really care how it's done, as long as it somehow allows, people to have a library that is theirs. Library.
I think we're on the same page here in the sense, but if I understand Adam's point so correctly, it's really that in order to do that and have something to show in the timescale that's there, we're going to have to elide a few things just to compress. So in terms of what we're showing may in fact be effectively something local. But the point is we may need to do some collaborative stuff, even if only just to have a common space where we can effectively park information. I mean, on my own server, I've got some web dev access, and I know enough about the technology to be dangerous. But for instance, I suspect I ought to be able to set up somewhere where at least people can put information in so that somebody else can do something and it be seen. So that the web aspect is actually disconnected from whether we're visualizing a local thing or a sort of a web scale thing. It's more about how do we make sure we can pass the information around other than via email, to just say, oh right, I've updated the data set, or this is an interesting thing, or can you connect this bit of code or this idea? So perhaps one of the things we might just want is a sort of shared space that's probably accessible to a small number of people, and if necessary with some kind of a Dropbox small d for other people to deliver stuff, because our ability to move forward, I think, will probably be as much constrained by having the right, effectively, data in the loosest sense as it is by the code. Because if the code's missing something, it needs to move forward. Even if the code is correct, there's nothing to see. And this is, at the end of the day, a visualization. So what the sizzle is going to be what we see. Obviously built on good stuff underneath, but the cell is primarily visual.
Yeah, and if we do something a bit, having a shared server, in some sense, a web server, we could. It's easier to show documents that should be personal or local, but still show it to everyone, so we can get a sense of. Right now, my prototypes have papers, and it's not. I can show it in video, or but links have legs usually. And, by mistake, and suddenly they show up on a shared screen in the address bar, and someone else types it in, and suddenly the link has legs. And so so maybe we should have maybe I should put it up on a web server, the prototypes here for the library thing.
Sure. I've got a sort of hosted. Well, it's a shared service. It's a virtual server on a Linux box, which I say I know enough about it to be dangerous, but with adult supervision, if necessary, I have the wherewithal to share a resource if that helps.
Yeah, that sounds like a way to go. But what is our priority? We have a beautiful system already. What do we want to focus on next? Do we want to focus on the way you find stuff, or the way you curate the view?
Well, what I hear, one of the things I hear, I mean, to a certain extent, the visual creation is already sort of there in some of the first view that Adam's done, and of course we can do more with that. But so I sense as another facet to that, what's coming out is something that's sort of in a loose area between trails and just a layer of observational metadata. So, you know, I don't want to call it tagging because I think tagging is a bit more casual than that, but it's this kind of thing where people can deliberately interchange a slightly deeper observation about the data set, and just looking about how that plays into things, and indeed how it maps to future, you know, is this something that feeds naturally into visual meta, which is ideally what we want, because, you know, whatever it's called or whatever it's built in, and it may not be using what we use now, but for this to move everybody forward, I think the really useful thing would be this thing of capturing more semantics. So as I put in the sidebar to, you know, Peter, if there are a couple of papers that spring to mind as being a good thing to look about, well, can we actually, even if only manually at this stage, go through a paper and say, okay, we can mark up these bits. And with care, we can do, this is this point, we can fake some of it at this stage. And that doesn't worry me. We explain why we've done it, because doing it at scale in advance of having the tools to help us do it, it is a resource we don't have. But I think it's perfectly, in sort of research and scholarly terms, is perfectly acceptable to say, but no, what we have mapped out is a task that's worth doing and possibly doable, even though we don't know all the bits involved. So that might be a way that we can help fill things out, in which case, obviously, what we'll really need to do is to do these, you know, and here's one I made already to show some of these ideas.
So if I would put, let's say, 200 hours into this, what would be most interesting to see from those 200 hours in the next 100 hours, or something, just enough hours to do something a bit more substantial?
For me, you putting this many hours the greatest benefit would be that I wouldn't have to. What I mean is, to read something deeply takes time, obviously. So to get rid of all the stuff that I really don't need to read is really valuable. So to have a quick way to zoom through this, but also to have it somewhat curation. And I mean, imagine if you have, within this system, we build it so that we can, anybody who has published a paper is allowed to curate this as a special curator. So you come across a paper that looks really interesting. There is maybe a button underneath that says, click here to see all the papers this person has personally said is interesting and why.
So the hard part in that for me, from the underlying data perspective, is that is a tranche of data that is is private, not intentionally so, but simply because it's not something people have even probably in a form they can share, which is not in any way antithetical to the point made. The question is how easily and how effectively we do a simulation of that, so that we can properly show the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. But a subset of that is let me just share my screen again here and have a look at this. So when I click on this, for instance, it's really cool that you have highlighted the other citations in this. But if I click on a citation here, it may be off screen.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what I think would be really nice if we have a mechanism whereby everything else fades out and it squishes together. So I really just have a set of what that one is, still somewhat related to this. So that it's easier to follow. And maybe I can lock it so that I can click on these different ones without losing this. Because, you know, as I said earlier, a set of references is that author saying these things are important.
Mm-hmm. As another suggestion, this is where it's a question for Adam, because I don't know the complexity involved. Might another way to sort of bite at the same cherry be to say, okay, this thing that effectively you tab or what out to effectively another view that only contains those items. So this is another way of aligning the extra data. So in other words, instead of perhaps having to dial down a massive amount of data, you basically step sideways into a new display space, which also gives us scope to project that however we like. It doesn't necessarily have to be on a linear time view.
I think that's a really strong point, Mark, because we already have part of that. Just write this, right?
Yeah.
So it does actually collapse them. So that is there. What would be really useful now is if I can mark hide or to read on these without clicking on them. Like this looks interesting. I want to be able to press spacebar or whatever, so that it stays in my reading view.
I presume effectively what you're doing is you're creating a data object that you would send by the magic of software to your reading space, because you're probably not going to read it in this visualization, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, but that's easy.
Yeah.
That's
no. Yes, well, that's easy because somebody else is taking it. No. I mean, you're right.
Mark, there's a DOI link.
Yeah, so that's what I was getting at. All I meant was, so we're not trying to read it here. What we're doing. So the marking up of the things to read is effectively you're marking an action to be made to send that data elsewhere, so that you'll read.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that as I go through clicking hide, to read, hide to read, etc., going through this, that stays here. Mm-hmm. And maybe in a tab view, all I see is what I have to read.
Okay.
Right? But once I click on an object in there, I should then use, ideally, not DOI. It would be great if it says, try to open it on your local system. So the act of reading one document is in whatever preferred reading software you have. But the curated view should be all in here. I don't think, with due respect, Adam, I don't think it's necessarily that much more work as far as the user sees to make that happen. What it'll actually take for you to make it programmatically happen is something else. But
I see Peter's got his hand up.
Yeah, Peter.
Sorry, I was trying to talk with the mute button still clicked. Anyhow, I think we're starting to talk in terms of set operations on groups of citations. So we're sort of building little citation sets, and then we could start applying set operations to them.
Okay, that's one way of talking about it, I guess.
So then when you're saying that you want to hold a few things open, that's basically adding them to a working set. And then you could apply set operations so that I could take Frode's set of favorites and cross them for the intersection of Frode's favorites and Mark's favorites and Adam's favorites, and use that to highlight things in the data set. So if we could have named citation sets and do set operations on them, I think that'd be really powerful, and it would integrate nicely with the current timeline interface we're looking at.
So what you're saying in terms of user interface then would be, for instance, I click on a document that Adam has written, and then I shift click on something Mark has written, and I get everything both of those documents have cited, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And you'd be able to build named citation sets. So if you're thinking about one thing, you could declare that you're going to have a citation set for, implementation papers. And you could select implementation papers. That would become your current active citation context. And then you could select a few different citations and all, and they'd get added to that working set. So then we'd have named sets that we could start doing interesting stuff with. So the set of citations itself should become a first-class entity in the system.
It also reinforces to me that we're all going to have to collectively learn to probably actually start applying semantics to our citational links, because when we say, Peter's links or Mark's links or whatever, actually, of course, within that could be, you know, I had to cite this because everyone says I must, you know, so there's a subtlety within that. And actually probably what we're wanting to draw from that larger set for any given person is the ones where you're actually saying, no, this is, you know, this is really interesting and central to this, as opposed to the other, which sort of is there often in the case of a paper just because it's standard scaffolding. It doesn't argue against the point at all. What it just says to me is there's work to do in defining the process to do this, and there's also an interesting sort of almost cultural change in thinking about how we do scholarly or in the wider sense, you know, within work disciplines, how we do the semantics of marking relationships, which is less in the old style that got kicked into the long grass of how do we do AI computation across a network, and this is more about saying what I am really capturing is the information that's in here that doesn't naturally fit into a database field. Okay, we are making it, we are surfacing it, but the point is this is quite separate to something as simplistic as tagging, which is basically just takes you back into keyword soup. That this is a more deliberate form of sorting or value sorting of relationships that otherwise would look to be of the same value.
Yeah, I think this is interesting.
One other thing that did occur to me is I think it's also be extremely useful that we don't throw away too many full starts. So I know that Adam played around with the heat map that we sort of thought didn't do things, because I do find the anti-patterns actually quite useful. And this is the thing that, you know, academic process certainly is really bad at messing up. So you are not rewarded for saying what didn't work. And I think here it's actually remarkably important, because there are lots of things we could do. And I think a lot of them, you can sort of see how they're just not going to deliver. And it's nothing to do with the style of the visualization or the quality of the way it's produced. It's just that it's not going to give you the you know, the granularity or the clarity that's required. So actually having a sense of, you know, just not forgetting there are some things that we know we looked at that seem inimical to this process, I think is actually important, really important contextual value.
Yeah. So in this, just, you know, to go to a little bit of a kind of dream mode here, one thing that I don't understand why we don't have in general, you know, in a calendar or whatever, is to be able to click on any element and then have options for what to see. So, you know, to click on an author's name, show all documents by this author, hide all documents from this author, star this author, you know, all of that stuff. Obviously, it makes it a very, Adam is working here. You know, it makes it exceptionally complicated, but as a principle.
I think I know partly why. So, because sticking inside your analogy, that when one sort of tries to do that, what you actually find is that there's a level of fuzziness that systems don't yet cope with unless they're very highly curated. So case in point, I think, to the vast amount of work I had to do on the authors in the data set, so that there's a canonical author.
Mark, I'm not worried about that. I know you're exceptionally worried about that, and I think that means that we just focus on different aspects of it. I think they're complementary.
I'm not, but the point is that you misunderstanding. This isn't it's not an argument against. So I'm just dwelling on the sense that I'm basically trying to see emergent issues to be resolved, which I that we can't get round. That doesn't mean that they are roadblocks. It's just making sure that we see these and say, these are things we have to address. We can't just sort of hope that somebody else is going to do it. I don't mean in this group, but in the wider sense, if we collectively, everybody are going to move forward in these things, these are some things that we're going to have to take on board. So at the moment, we sort of assume that it's edited out. Once it moves into a data field as we want, then the question, I suppose the emergent question is not, can we sort the data out? Yes, we can, but it's who is doing that?
Mark, I'm not interested in that question. You are, and that is very different. That's why I developed the tool Liquid. Select anything and do any search. If there isn't a good answer, there isn't a good answer. I'm very,
no, it's not. It's not. But you can't. The point is, you get back an answer. You don't know if the answer is any good. This is the problem with the current.
But the thing is, we need to clean up the data. That's totally fine, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Confucius said the first thing he would do if he came to power was to make sure everything is named correctly, which is ridiculous because you can't do that because different names from different perspectives. What is that? That is a wall. No, it's not. That's a prison. No. That means freedom, right? So there's so many things, and I don't think we disagree on this. But what something is really depends on who is asking the question, when, and for what reason, and what context. They're complicated things. So of course, in something as relatively constrained as a data set from a conference series, some rigor should be applied. But as Dave DeRoer said, his name is all over the map all the time. And yes, we're trying to address that, not necessarily solve that in the naming field that we're trying to do in author, which someone pointed out to me. Last name is a very Western thing. Some people call it family name. Already there, I think it was like, yeah. Anyway, so what I'm saying is we shouldn't, and I don't think you disagree with this part. We shouldn't let the desire for interaction be destroyed because the interactions won't be perfect and clear.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And right now, talking with Adam about what kind of thing to build and what he should maybe consider doing, I think we should be cautious about spending too much effort on what if it's not the right things that line up. I think that's kind of a deep and separate discussion. Because he can only, the data cleansing, which you do, and the data, let's try to export it correctly, that I'm focusing on, is feeding into the Adam thing. He's sharing screen. Okay. Oh yeah, this thing.
Let's see. Yeah, but this is a interactive, lightly interactive version, but just to show how I'm thinking right now. So this is the data set turned on the other side. Ignore the colors. They're ugly. I just got someone said on the internet that everyone is using blue on gray, and they even had a acronym for it. So took other colors.
I don't think these colors are ugly, and I'm picky.
Yeah, but I just wanted to change it. But these are all the papers on the other side. Here is a kind of everything is very rough right now. But some papers are so if you click on a paper, you get the information on the side. If you click on that, these are the papers references in the paper. If you click on that, you get that on the side, and you can continue read deeper and deeper, or to read different. So you keep your trail here. But here is that other part. Then if you select a paper, you actually can read that. My idea now, it's hidden here, just for you to see here, and the internet. But here you can also get the paper if you have the paper, like we do now. We have 10 papers here. You can read the papers inline here directly. Now it's hidden, but it shouldn't be hidden. It should just be side by side here. So you can, and I imagine that on the side you could kind of filter down to see all links, all references, or as Peter said, all the quotes in this document, that we do some light data processing.
That's where Scholarseek could help as well, of course.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, but the underlying
I have a
idea is
question,
that
Adam. Quick question.
Yep.
If you go all the way to the okay, so you have see right by cursor hype pursuits.
Yep.
If you click on that, don't do it yet, please. Does that come after the hypertext paths opening or before, or does it replace it?
Currently it replaces it, but I imagine that the document to the right that was previously selected should go into a kind of a light history. So you, on the bottom or somewhere you see where you were at a moment ago. So it's still there somewhere. But of course we're browsing this kind of a big graph or tree, and we can't show everything at the same time. So something has to get hidden. Here, unlike regular web pages, I show something side by side here. I don't replace everything, but I still replace. If you go down a different branch on the tree, you have to replace something at some point. So I imagine that now if I click on this, it's replaced. But I imagine this document to fly down to the bottom here, and get stored for the at least for the browsing session. And maybe you could save the whole. If you're happy with this chain, that you could save this kind of a chain or a trail here, so you can open up the same 3 documents here. So this is something I've been playing with. In a way, it's combining both, your view in a way, and or the list view and the timeline view. It's not as useful yet, but it's interesting to think about it this way, because you can integrate much more functionality into this.
I think this is very impressive, and I think it's very useful. What I look forward to is having enough options so the document dots on the left can be reduced drastically in an easy way, so I can focus on the goodies. So, the things we were talking about now, okay, so for instance, what are you thinking? If you go up where you're up on top of this document, it has David Gibson. What would a useful option be to click on or mouse over for David Gibson? I guess it would be all the documents that person has written, right?
Yep, some biographical information, and maybe if you click on it, at least, I think you should get all the documents, or like we discussed that in your view. With maybe when David Miller was on the call, we talked about how if we click an author, what should we see? And I think here it's natural to actually show some biographical information and all the relevant published documents in this view.
One thing that would be really interesting, Adam, at least for me, is if I can have this on my computer and I take my PhD thesis as I'm working on it and I give it to this system. And because I'm giving it to you in quote unquote perfect visual meta as we designed together, it should be able to do the references easily and everything else. So everything that is visual meta-able should be there, right? So that should then help me give a view of this corpus, what I've interacted with and what I haven't. And it should also allow my professor, when they are reviewing my document, to instantly see, why in the world didn't I do this and why did I do that, right? But because it's my document, it should be easy to take in and out of this environment. Make sense?
Yeah, I like the idea that, so within a given session also that you can effectively create essentially a trail. It's kind of a branching map, which the other thing by capturing it would also that you'd have a little bit of nugget of data that you could possibly in some other view look at and refine, because you might want to prune out a branch where you went down a wrong rabbit hole, especially if it was something you wanted to keep and reuse or you wish to share with others. So the ability to do that, I think, is quite interesting, and obviously is an implementation challenge as to the where and the how, but conceptually being able to capture that exploration path, I think is interesting.
Yeah, and I imagined that you, in this view, you have the documents you have checked are slightly colored in some way, so you get for, at least for this session as well, you know where you clicked, like with regular links. I
see Peter's got his hand up.
I posted a few links to some discussions of laboratory notebooks in the sidebar. Y Combinator was talking about them in a few discussions recently. And that's the notion that beyond capturing what the official description of your experiment is, it's just as important to capture the dead ends and the false starts that you had along the way and make that information available to successive researchers so that they can benefit from it. So there are a few things there in the links. I also posted a link to a JavaScript package called Hylar. It gives you a description logic reasoner that can run on Node or in a web browser. I haven't used it for anything yet, but it looks like it's the kind of an affordance that I want to build into the library project. So Adam might be able to get a little benefit from poking around at that. So there's a link to the paper on it and the actual repository.
It's interesting you mentioned sort of laboratory notebooks, and so one of my sort of cohort of my PhD students, colleagues, Sami Kanzo, who's Fed Shot Cookie, has been doing stuff with that and semantic web. I was going to explore that, because it's, in other words, so where they're trying to move notebooks forward, and I think you can probably see where I'm going with this. So there may actually, this sort of neatly takes us back to the metadata aspect. So what can these processes capture? Because part of it is what curation can be done for us that isn't actually just creating another heap of data that's more work to do later. I mean, it's interesting challenge, and it's not something I see too many systems doing. State of the art seems to be capturing state and collecting buckets of stuff, and that's an advance on what we had before. So that's not to speak ill of it. So, but this idea of capturing, being able to capture some intent is really interesting.
So in this fantastic view, Adam, in terms of your interest levels, a couple of questions. Number one, take a fresh PDF with visual meta and putting it in and have that as a special thing. Is that something you want to play with?
Yes, at some point it feels very natural to do that, but I want to nail down a bit more about of the actual interactions first. What is this useful? Is this more useful than having the two separate views, or than that we had before? I think the other timeline is more, it's more pretty and colorful at the moment, but this could be made, we could do the same highlighting here as well, so we could effectively translate it into this, because this is more compact in a way. And
Adam, I think this one wins hands down because of exactly that. There is a column to read that is comfortable. In the horizontal timeline, that reading bit is awful. In the vertical timeline, the reading thing is much better, but you have nothing else. This is a really good use of screen real estate to maximize view. And the thing on the left is really neat, but I think it's a general shape. Thumbing through it has almost no value. Going up and down has no real value. It has no meaning that those papers are next to each other. So it's only an indication that there's a lot of documents. And if we can do some of these things we talk about, just to see this thing get smaller is nice. And also maybe at a certain point, when it's below a certain threshold, you can start showing thumbnails or the titles. That was scary.
But it's interesting. I mean, it's all code that has to be written. But the other thing is, so what this sort of yellowy brown panel is essentially, this is your, whatever's displayed there, this is your session document scope. Now, whether that's every accessible document you have in your local library, a data set provided by somebody else. So this is what I'm sort of deconstructing in my mind here. So it happily crosses this local or shared thing. So, so in other words, the outer boundary of what you're looking at here is the data set, the things that turn up in the left, leaving aside from exactly how they look and how wide it is or what shape they are. So that's your, as it were, your universe, and then from which we then track outwards.
I have a completely different idea, not different from what you were describing, Mark. We agree on that. But imagine if I now drag my PDF onto this. It populates the left with my references, whether they're in this library or not.
Well, exactly, because then essentially what you're doing is the end of that is you've loaded a custom set of data.
Yeah, so the left side is only what's in my document. It has nothing to do with ACM inherently.
Mm-hmm.
That in itself would have tremendous value for a student and a teacher. Les Carr, Mark and I know him well, advisor, very busy. He feels that references should be a first class citizen in this world, and he's looked at different ways of manipulating it. For him to be able to look at this and instantly say what has been cited and what is missing would have huge value.
So just a thought, Fro, do your, as things stand, the PDFs that you have that you're using either directly already cited or that are sort of, in your sort of metaverse of references that you may or may not use, do they all have visual meta, or how quickly could they, how big a set are we talking about? I'm just wondering if I could, I suppose we know what the documents are, you have a number of those. So the question is, how quickly could we put some useful visual meta in to make them an exploratory set so that we could move this forward? So it's going to, or do we just completely fake it?
When you open a PDF in Reader, it will attempt to assign visual meta based on its DOI if there is one. Okay,
so but does it add that? What I mean is, do you have all those PDFs with that semi metadata in what? But so that we could then experiment with what you've just said, because in order for Adam to visualize that, we're going to need. It's one thing to say, well, I could drag something in. I think to be able to show it, we need to sort of work on a demo.
My own thesis is, of course, exported with visual meta, where all the references I have made are in a visual meta format.
Good. So in that case, you ought to be potentially be able to, we should be able to read all of those out to populate, as it were, that the left panel of what you're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know some stuff will be missing, but we know that. That's a sort of that's a known unknown. So that could be an interesting, just collecting that lot together, so Adam could effectively extracting it the once, so that Adam can play with it without having to go back and forth on the documents. Would probably be extremely useful at this point.
I'm sending you, Adam, my PDF in its current rough state. I'm not sharing it with Mark because that'll be too embarrassing. Certainly not Peter, also too embarrassing. So you can have a look at how things are encoded there and see if it is the kind of way you would want to use it. Oh, also, actually, can you open it up and share screen? Because I want to just tell you guys something.
You're muted, Adam.
I sent it via email, not there, not here.
Yeah, the barbarian will look at the document. And so should I stop sharing, or do you want to show something?
Well, if you want to look at it live, you can do that. Otherwise, I can do it. Okay, I'll just share from here then. So yeah, what I was going to show is this document here, folded go to the visual meta appendix. I just wanted to show you guys this. So this is new. It's normal size, and it says what it is, because I was worried that people would look at this and just think it's junk without checking.
Yeah.
So it is there. But in the visual meta that is live now from author, so it has the heading stuff, of course, self-citation, and all of that. Get headers there. These are the citations.
Great.
So it is structured, so you should be able to extract that relatively easily.
Beautiful.
And it has, thank you. It has also, what is this? Yeah, that's.
But I mean, where it's really interesting is so this is pushing down into where visual meta is taking us. So that's also an interesting validation, and it will also be seen. It will be useful to see sort of what's clean and what's dirty when actually sort of taken as data, which will give us a pointer to where we may need to think about some tweaks. So this is really interesting.
This is glossary entries. So that is in the visual meta now. It's not just referring to it in the document.
Great.
And what is this stuff? Oh, yeah,
Headings.
The headings.
So most of these things could, of course, be listed at least on the to the right. So if you click on anything, or you could see a list of the details. So that's a first easy first step. And then we have to look into actually scanning regular PDF documents for some useful information, extracting it on the fly, because we could do that at least extracting the text and making a column of the references. Maybe we could at least find out.
Well, if you want to benefit visual meta, me and my teacher, me as a student and my teacher as any teacher, the ability to explode one single document that I have written is really potentially amazingly interesting. I'll show you something else that is currently not good, but it's in the right direction. So this relates to what Peter was asking earlier. If I do Command-Shift-D, it shows me the headings plus defined concepts, right? One thing that is not good is that it, if there's more than one in one section, it repeats them. It shouldn't do that. And I made it gray. It probably should be black. Lots of issues, right? But all of this is available now in the PDF, this kind of stuff. And
actually, in the definitions, I would, as it's the definitions you're interested in, what I do is make them black and actually the headings gray, because the headings are important, but they're secondary to the definitions in this context.
Mark Anderson is teaching me graphic design, really.
Every day at school day, Fred.
I think you have a good point there, actually. So this is the current formatting of the references. It's just the minimum amount, because I have to.
Sorry, you're dropping out, Fred.
Okay. Am I back? Yeah, it says.
No, you're coming to us via the moon at the moment.
Sorry.
Oh.
Back. Okay. So this is. I have to pay for this programming, and it's expensive, so that's why it's really boring, the reference list. But they have generally a year associated with it, as they should. The normal stuff is here, and it is in the visual meta. So I know that my teacher would like to see several things. He would like to see, if I have cited something, why have I cited it twice? He also wants to know, why have I cited it in this section? That is something he has also said in a meeting. So if, for instance, you could take the visual meta and organize the references by section, if that's all you did, that one thing would be incredibly useful. And if we can build things that are really useful for teachers to evaluate the work, chances are they will tell students to hand in the work in that way, right? And if we take the amazing stuff you already have, Adam, then if this goes into that world and that person is teaching hypertext, that teacher can instantly see that the student has forgotten to cite important papers and ask why those are not cited. So the analysis of a paper into that world is just very exciting.
Fred, just a thought. Do you, because I'm sure Les wouldn't, it's something he'd have just shoved out there, but Les did something for a Waste Fest about 2-3 years ago, where he took something and he was basically parsing a PDF to show where references occur. So some of that code actually might be pertinent to this. So
it wasn't code as such. He did it for me because he was frustrated with my paper, and it's his area of interest. It was basically scripts for Excel and Word and stuff like that.
Okay.
The logic may still be.
That's what I mean. I'm just wondering, it just might provide, anything, bearing in mind time is sort of ticking. I'm just thinking if there's anything useful, because it might just help Adam, possibly not. I hadn't realized that basically it was drawing from something like a word script. I thought he was parsing a PDF or something. So maybe it's not as simple as I thought. But are you, in your document, are you using named citation format or numbers?
In the document, it's hard bracket numbers. Okay,
so that's a target that presumably with some degree of accuracy, there will always be an edge case, but probably those can be pulled out and therefore their positions. Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
So I didn't fully get to what do you want to see with regards to that exactly?
Are you asking Anderson or me right now?
Yeah, both of you, because you seem to be in
Sorry.
Okay. So what should happen, or what should you see? Do you want to see the references based on position and document, or together with the titles? Is that what you're saying, as one of the views?
Yeah, I'm saying that there should be a quick way to toggle through the views. One of them should be exactly that. So you have something that looks similar to this. Maybe you hide the numbers and you highlight the title, something nice. But in between, you will have the names of the sections, because these are not alphabetical. These are actually from where they are in the document.
Okay, right.
So might as well have blah, 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 right? So you can see where they are. That's one. And then to toggle to see these used ones into the view you already have, list them by date. And then you can have them also by, basically.
In your formatting, Fred, so if you cite a document a second time, does it turn up a second time in your references?
We tried to filter it, but it's not always very good.
No, I understand. It's not a critique. I'm just understanding the nature.
We try, but it fails.
That's all right. I'm just wondering, one thing that might be useful is, and I don't know if it's what Les did for you, or whether because I recall he did it maybe in about 2016, 2017 Waste Fest. And he had some little graphs he'd showed. And so basically you could see where references were occurring. And I just wonder if there's anything left over from that even just to share with people here, just almost it's seeing the picture.
I know what you're talking about. Did I delete the wrong thing there? Good.
At least one thing that could be useful here is that if you have a reference list sorted in any way, either by chronologically or by author name, or hovering or over that list in some way, or clicking it in some special way, should show you a small preview of where it's actually used. With the looks of the paper, so you're actually getting a preview from the paper. Do you get my point here? So you actually see the PDF and not just as text, but actually looking at it as it looks in the paper in the same graphical way. I like that kind of peeking into the document from a list, especially if it's graphical and a PDF. It's nice to see it as it is as well.
I think that sounds very useful, yes. Someone singing? Cute.
Not here.
No, it's the person sitting next to me. who's busy destroying civilization, I think, at the moment.
With singing? That's interesting.
Singing as Rome burns.
I can't find from.
Well, anyway, Fred, I think you know what I mean. I'm just thinking it might be interesting to show Adam, just because I do recall there being some sort of visuals out of what Les had done, and even the pictures might just be, kind of a idea spurring thing. Because one of the reasons he was doing that, he was interested, is he wanted to sort of see, well, where is the student placing the references? So in other words, it's almost like in a way, it's like a sort of signature. It's almost like you're looking for the right shaped curve. If all the references say right at the end, so what's going on in the literature review, which normally is towards the beginning. It's this sort of thing, and it's just I guess another heuristic that comes out of this, but it's all feeding off the same underlying data.
It had, in some of them, you would read the chapter names vertically. And then you'll have the amount of citations above them. And if something had been cited before, it would have a different color. So you could see that somebody cited that twice in the document. But then you could see how many citations there were per section. That would be how high that dot was. So it would have, dot, dot, dot. That would be lots of citations, maybe dot here. So you could say, why are there so many citations here? They really should be in the background. They shouldn't be in the survey result. Why have you done that? Instantly, that kind of result would be visible.
Dumb question for Fred, because I should have tried this before they answered the question. If I open my thesis document in Reader, will it generate VM for it?
Only the self-citation if you have a DOI.
Okay. Well, I might think, that's another thought. I'll go away and have a think and see if I can basically I generate equivalent data to the sort of stuff that Fraser just showed you. And it might just give you another data set to play with. Adam, after this, I'll email you a copy of the PDF of the thesis, just so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm not expecting you actually to read or anything, but mainly you can just look at and see at the sort of range. Another interesting thing in this case is there are two references, bibliographies, whatever. One is effectively what you think is normal references, and the other is a vast number of URLs that all point to the Wikipedia sort of enterprise, because that was part of the research. So they're literally citations down to edit levels on things. But I just thinking, so it just came to mind, here's another thing that I know well enough that I could probably generate another set of specimen data to play with, because I think that's the most contribution I can make is giving you stuff that we know is fairly solid, that you can concentrate on the visualization rather than worrying about why the data has ghastly holes in it.
Can we create our own DOIs, or is there some central authority that has to give us blessing in order to have a range of DOI numbers?
Central authority.
And you pay for it.
Okay, is there a decentralized alternative that we could use instead?
Well, yeah, the VMID. But it doesn't return anything. The point of the DOI is, of course, it can return data about that object. But in terms of just for being able to refer to, we can do anything that's unique. However, one thing that could be fun is if you have a system whereby it becomes decentralized by the fact of the documents themselves. So let's say that the document name is a VMID type thing, right? And you put that on the internet anywhere. And if you then search for that document, the act of finding it gives you that data because it's inside the document. But then it would already have it. Yeah, well, yeah, DOIs are weird. I don't quite know how they fit.
We want to start bringing lots of legacy stuff in. We don't want to have to be paying to provide DOIs for dead authors' papers.
I mean, DOIs in a sense, it's another sort of pragmatic state-of-the-art thing, in the sense that I don't think anyone really wants to pay for them, but the point is at the moment. It's a system, and it's kind of bitly for, you know, for academic papers, and who's to know whether they'll last forever. But at the moment, its main benefit is, you know, it's a parsable, well, so sort of known format, because actually pretty much everything after the DOI.org bit, it transpires. It's again, it's all full of unuseful characters like parentheses and things that really screw up regex. Thanks, humanities. You know, because people haven't really thought through their encoding.
I'm going to stop recording now since we're over time anyway. Any final things you want on the recording? No? Okay.
Nope.